We continue now at the top of Daf Chaf Beis and Aleph and Meseches Gittin. This is Gittin Daf 22a. And the previous summit, the Gemara is discussing a case where a get is written on a leaf, and the leaf is part of a plant that is in a pot. The pot has a hole in it, and so the question is whether that will work as a get. Abaye says it does work as a get. He'll just take the entire plant, and he'll give that whole plant, the whole pot and the plant, to her as a get. Rava says puzzle, that's puzzle, Gezeira Shamayiktam, because there's a Gezeira, maybe he'll end up cutting off the leaf. Instead of giving her the entire plant, maybe he'll cut the leaf, and that's going to be a problem of Ktsitsa, of cutting between the writing and the giving of the get. Rashi says the shakale la'atzitz v'yav nihil. He'll take the whole pot and give it to her. Shemayiktom, but Rava says no. Maybe he'll cut ha'ala. Maybe he'll cut off the leaf. V'have ktsitzah min ha'mechuber. That's going to be considered cutting something which is attached to the ground, and that would be a problem. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Otzitz shalacher uzroim shalacher. Let's say again you have this perforated pot. The pot belongs to one person, and the seeds, the plant, belongs to somebody else. So machar bal otzitz lebal zroim. If the owner of the pot sells the pot to the owner of the seeds, kevan shemashach kana. Once he makes a kinyan meshicha, he pulls on it like a regular movable object. That creates the kinyan. Machar bal zroim lebal otzitz. Now, if the person who owns the seeds, he sells his portion to the owner of the pot, lo kanat sheyachzak bezroim. So there, the kinyan only takes effect when he makes a kinyan chazaka on the zroim, on the seeds. Rashi explains that sheyachzak bezroim, he needs a chazaka on the zroim. The pot itself is considered detached from the ground. Umikni b'meshicha, and you make a kinyan meshicha, like a regular item that's detached from the ground. But zuroim have a mechubarn, but the seeds are actually considered attached to the ground. V'dinan kekarka, they're considered like land. V'niknim b'kesef v'shtar v'chazaka, so the kinyan is either through kesef, shtar, or chazaka, money, a document, or a chazaka, you do an act of possession. It's not going to be a chazaka until he actually takes possession, meaning he does something like pruning. To have a chazaka, that already would create a chazaka. We're talking obviously where he didn't give money. The yoiv zuze mikna b'kesef. If he gave money, so then the kinyan kesef would work. The point over here is that again, if it's mechuber lakarka, it's a different kinyan than if it's not considered mechuber lakarka. And the Gemara continues. Let's say one person owns both the pot and the seeds. He sells them to somebody else. Hechzik bizroim. If he makes a chazaka, if he takes possession of the seeds, kana atzitz, then along with that he can acquire the pot. V'zui shashaninu nechasim shein lam achrayis niknin im nechasim sheyesh lam achrayis bekesuf v'shtar v'chazaka. That's what we learned, that if you have nechasim that don't have achrayis, meaning you have regular movable property, that can be acquired along with property that has achrayis, meaning to say that which is considered land. Meaning if you make a kinyan on the land through kesef shtar and chazaka, or in this case you make a kinyan on the mechuber lakarka through kesef shtar and chazaka, you'll be able to acquire the metaltalin as well. He'll be able to acquire the pot as well. Hechzik biyotzitz, but if he makes a kinyan chazaka on the yotzitz, afotzitz lokana, even the yotzitz is not going to be acquired because the kinyan chazaka doesn't work on movable property. At sheyachzik bizram, he has to make a kinyan chazaka on the zroim, on the seeds. And the Gemara continues, Nikva ba'aretz v'nofo b'chutz la'aretz. Let's say you have a plant that's in a perforated pot, and the perforation is in Eretz Yisrael, but the branches extend out to chutz la'aretz. So does this plant have a status of Eretz Yisrael in terms of the halachas of trumas and maestros? They'd be chayv on a doraisa level, or is it as if it's in chutz la'aretz? Abaye Amar Basar Nikvo Azlinan, Rava Amar Basar Nofo Azlinan. Abaye says we follow the perforation, we follow the hole in the pot, and Rava says we follow the branches. If the branches are in chutz la'aretz, then it has a status of chutz la'aretz. And the Gemara explains, if the plant actually takes root, meaning the roots go through the hole in the pot, and it actually takes root in the earth of Eretz Yisrael. So there's no disagreement. Everybody agrees that in that case it would have a status of Eretz Yisrael. Ki pligi b'delo eshesh. The whole machlokas is if it doesn't take root in Eretz Yisrael, so then there's a question: do we say that we follow the area where the hole is because that's where the nourishment is coming from, or do we say we follow the area where the branches are? And the Gemara says, is it really true that they don't argue in a situation where it takes root? But we learned in a Mishnah, let's say you have two gardens, one is above the other, meaning to say the gardens are right next to each other, but one's at a higher elevation than the other. V'yerek bein time, and then there's vegetation that is growing in between, meaning it's coming out of the side of the embankment that's between the two gardens. Rabbi Meir Omer Shel Elyon, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shel Tachton. Rabbi Meir says that vegetation belongs to the person on top, and Rabbi Yehuda says it belongs to the person on the bottom. And here you have a situation where clearly it's taking root in the earth of the person who owns the garden that's on top, and yet we're saying there's a machlokas tanoim who this yerek belongs to. And the Gemara says, Hasam Kedekatani time over there, it's as the reason is given over there, there's a different reasoning over there. Amar Rabbi Meir says, Ma'im Yirtza Elyon, Litol Esafaro, Ein Kan Yerek. If the person on top would take away his dirt, there'd be no Yerek, so he has the monetary claim to the Yerek. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda says, Ma'im Yirtza Atachton Lamalos, Es Ginoso Offer Ein Kan Yerek. If the person on the bottom wanted to fill up his entire garden with dirt, so there would be no Yerek. So that has to do with monetary claims on the Yerek, that's the argument. But in terms of the halachas of Trumas and Ma'is, in terms of determining whether it's considered a plant from Eretz Yisrael or from Chutz La'aretz, this would not be relevant. But the Gemara continues, V'akati b'de'esher shlo pligi, but still is there no machlokas in a situation where it takes root? V'atanya, but we learned in a brayso, Ilon miksaso ba'aretz u'miksaso b'chutz la'aretz. Let's say you have a tree, partially it's in Eretz Yisrael, partially in Chutz La'aretz. Tevel v'chulin mu'ravin zeh b'zeh divrei Revi. Revi says it's considered tevel and chulin that are all mixed up, meaning every single fruit is considered to have a little bit of Eretz Yisrael, a little bit of Chutz La'aretz. They're all considered mixtures of tevel and chulin. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Hagadol b'chiyav chayiv, v'hagadol b'ptor pater. Any fruits that are growing in an area of chiyav, meaning in Eretz Yisrael, they're chayiv, and any fruits that are growing in the area of ptor, meaning in Chutz La'aretz, that's considered to be pater. And so the Gemara now says, my lav is it not? Mixas nofo ba'aretz, u'mixas nofo b'chutz la'aretz. The case is exactly this case. The tree is growing in Eretz Yisrael, but in terms of the branches, some of the branches are in Eretz Yisrael, and some of the branches are in Chutz La'aretz, and still we see a machlokas, even though all of the roots are in Eretz Yisrael. So we see there is a machlokas tanoim in this regard. The Gemara says, lo, no, that's not the explanation of the brayso. Mixas shorashin ba'aretz u'mixas shorashin b'chutz la'aretz. The case actually is that some of the roots are in Eretz Yisrael, and some of the roots are in Chutz La'aretz. It's not a situation where all of the roots are in Eretz Yisrael, and that's why there's a machlokas tanoim. But the Gemara says if that's the case, in my time with Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, if that's the case, so what's the reasoning of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel? Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says any fruits that are growing in Eretz Yisrael, they're chayiv, and if they're growing in Chutz La'aretz, they're pater. But why should that be the case? If you have roots that are in Eretz Yisrael, and if you have roots that are in Chutz La'aretz, so there certainly should be a mixture of the nourishment, and there certainly should be something along the lines of the psak of Rebbe. And the Gemara says to that, the mafsik tsunma, that there's a separation of a rock, meaning underneath the ground, there's a rock that goes up to the base of the trunk of the tree. It separates the roots completely, so that some roots are completely on the Eretz Yisrael side, and some roots are completely on the Chutz La'aretz side, and therefore there is no mixture according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. And the Gemara then says, according to that, my time at the Rebbe, so what's the reason of Rebbe? Why does Rebbe say that there is considered to be a mixture? And the answer is the Hadri Arvi, because they again mix once it comes up, once the nourishment comes up into the trunk of the tree, so everything mixes together according to Rebbe. And the Gemara says, B'mai kamiflagi, what is the root of the machlokas between Rebbe and Rav Shimon ben Gamliel? Mar savar avira mevalbel, mar savar haylechudei koi, v'haylechudei koi. One says that the avira means the airspace, but really what it means is the trunk, what's happening above the ground, that mixes everything up. That's Rebbe's opinion, everything gets mixed up again, and that's why there's a mixture over here in terms of Chiyav and Petur. And the other opinion, the opinion of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, is once there's a separation below the earth, so everything remains separate all the way through, and that's why Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says Hagadol b'Chiyav Chayiv, and Hagadol b'Petur is Pater. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer v'chulu. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira said that if you have a get that is written on erased paper or on diphthera, so that's something that's easily forged, so then it's not going to be kosher for a get. The Rabbanan disagreed, the Chachamim disagreed, and they said it is kosher. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chia bar Asi mishmei de'ula. Rav Chia bar Asi says in the name of Ula, Gimel Oros Hain. There are three levels of hides. What we mean to say over here is when you're making parchment, so there's different levels of treatment, and so here you have three unfinished types of hide. Matzah, chipa, v'diphthera. Their names are matzah, chipa, and diphthera. And the Gemara explains. Matzah kemashma. Matzah is exactly what it sounds like. Delo maliach, udelo kamiach, udelo afetz. There are three stages when they're creating the parchment. They salt it, and they put flour, and they put in gall nuts. So matzah is that you did none of this treatment. They didn't salt it, they didn't put in flour, they didn't put in gall nuts. Lamai hilchasa, for what practical halacha do we have a shear for this? Do we have a measurement? Lo tzas Shabbos, there's a measurement in terms of how large a piece of parchment like this are you not allowed to carry out on Shabbos? V'kama shear, what is the amount? Kedekatani Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, it's like Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda taught, kedei lotzer mishkal katan, in order to cover up a small weight. In other words, they would use this kind of a hide to cover up a small weight. That's the shear that's considered significant. That's going to be chayiv if you carry that amount on Shabbos. The common, how much is that? Amar Abai says ki riva de riva de pumbedisa. It's like a quarter of a quarter. This was a shear that was used in pumbedisa. And Rashi explains, Mishkola shaloferis, this was like a lead weight, asuya lios pocheses umechapenos abur. It would deteriorate, so in order to protect it, they covered it with hide, shalote nishofes upochasa, so that it wouldn't deteriorate. And riva de riva, quarter of a quarter, mishkal katan shalanohaya. This was the smallest weight that they had in Pumbedisa. And the Gemara continues, chipa, what is chipa? De meliach, it's salted, so it's partially treated. However, velo kmiach, velo office, but they don't add flour, they don't put any gallnut. Lamai hilchasa, for what halach in terms of shiurim, lo tzah Shabbos, for carrying on Shabbos, v'kam shiura, what is the measurement? Meaning, again, what is the minimum amount of the chipa that one carries that he's liable on Shabbos? Kedetanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, or when we talk about or a hide, that refers to this case of chipa. Kedei lasos kamiyah, it's the measurement that is used for an amulet, and again, they would cover the amulet with this kind of a hide. And Rashi explains, chipa mesukan ksas, it has some treatment, v'roi l'chapos bo kamiyah, and it's fit that you can cover amulets with it, and again, that is the shear for Hotzoas Shabbos. And the Gemara continues, diftera, what is diftera? De meliach or kamiach, it's treated even more. It's salted and they add flour, v'lo ofitz, but there's no gallnuts. Lamai hilchasa lo tzah Shabbos, for what halach in terms of shiurim, for the carrying of Shabbos, v'kama shiuro, how much is the shear? What is the minimum amount of carrying diftera that's liable on Shabbos? Kedei lichtov olav esaget, it's enough to write a get on it that follows the shita of the Chacham in the Mishnah, that it's kosher to write a get on diftera. Rashi says, lichtov olav esaget, ki rabbanon demachshri, again, that's following the Rabbanon's opinion, that diftera is kosher for a get. Umiu klaf gomer, now Rashi notes that klaf gomer, what is real klaf? What's real parchment? That's totally treated. The maliach or kamiach va'afitz, that's already salted, and they add flour, they add gallnuts. Lo shmeor, that's not even called hide anymore. That's referred to as klaf. Mishum hachi lo mani bahadayu, that's why we don't mention that over here. The shiurei tanan b'hamotzi yain, you can find the shear for klaf in Meseches Shabbos. Klaf kadei lichto bo parsha katana shebetfilin. Klaf, the shear is to write a small parsha in the tefillin. Avol diftera eno kosher tefillin. Diftera is not kosher for tefillin. Hilkach shiuro beget. That's why the shear is measured as the amount that one uses to write a get. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, v'chacham machshir, and again the Chachamim say that it can be written on paper that was erased, it can be written on parchment that can be forged. And the Gemara says, man chachamim, who is this chachamim? Amar Rebbe Elazar says, Rashi says, man chachamim kolomar man ninu amay tamayot demachshir, meaning who is the chachamim, which Tana, and why would they say it's kosher to write a get on a kind of a parchment which is easy to forge? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chav Beis Amud Beis.